I arrived at the funeral home 40 minutes early because I knew my mother would already be there, rearranging things. She always did. The flowers, the photograph selections, the narrative itself. I stood in the vestibule of Morris & Sons on Barrington Street, Halifax, watching her through the doorway as she moved my father's navy portrait 3 inches to the left, then back again, her fingers trembling just enough to betray that she knew I was watching. If you've ever wondered how a story like this ends, follow this channel, because what happened next changed everything. I have been a police detective for 16 years. I learned early that people reveal themselves not in what they say, but in what they rearrange when they think no one is looking. My mother spent my childhood rearranging me, my expectations, my memories, my understanding of why she left when I was 11 and didn't come back until I was 29. She returned 3 months after my father's stroke, when the house on Quinpool Road suddenly needed managing and his pension needed accessing. I watched her then the way I watch suspects in interview rooms. Quietly. Cataloging. She wore black silk to his funeral, the same dress she'd worn to her sister's wedding 4 years earlier. I recognized it not because I have a good memory for clothing, but because I have a good memory for inconsistencies. People who grieve don't rewear. People who perform do. Her hair was freshly colored, a soft auburn that caught the light from the stained glass. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her at Christmas. She looked elegant. Expensive. She looked like someone who had just come into money, even though my father had been living on a fixed income and I'd been paying his medical expenses for the past 18 months. The service was small. My father had outlived most of his close friends, and the ones who remained were too frail to travel in February. My half-brother Jordan flew in from Toronto. I hadn't seen him in 6 years. He looked like our mother, sharp cheekbones, pale eyes that never quite met yours directly. He worked in marketing for a firm whose name changed every time I asked. He hugged me in the vestibule with the distant warmth of someone embracing a colleague at a conference. We sat in the front pew. My mother between us, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing shallow and controlled. The minister spoke about service and sacrifice, about a man who had given 30 years to the Navy and 20 more to the community as a volunteer Coast Guard instructor. I listened to the words and thought about the last time I'd seen my father conscious, 3 weeks before he died, when he'd gripped my hand and said, "The house. Make sure she doesn't," and then the words dissolved into confusion and he forgot what he was trying to warn me about. After the service, we gathered at a restaurant my mother had chosen, a place with white tablecloths and waiters who moved like shadows. 23 people came. I counted. My mother sat at the head of the table, receiving condolences with a gracious nod, her voice low and steady. She was good at this. She had always been good at performing loss. I was standing near the restrooms, checking my phone, when I heard her voice through the partially open door of the private event room adjacent to ours. She was on the phone. I should have walked away. In my personal life, I have boundaries. But my father's voice was still in my head, "Make sure she doesn't," and I stayed. "It's done," she said. "The service was lovely." "Yes, I know. I'll have the paperwork finalized by Monday." A pause. "Jordan's half comes to $83,000. We agreed. The house appraised at $410, and after the mortgage payoff and fees, it's about $330 net. He gets half of that, minus the advance I gave him last year." Another pause. Longer. "Evelyn's half is already allocated. She won't contest it. She's never asked about the estate. I told you, she doesn't even know there is one. Her father kept her out of it for a reason." I felt my breathing go shallow. Not from panic. From focus. It's the same thing that happens when a case breaks open in an interview room. A suspect says one word wrong, one detail that doesn't fit, and everything sharpens. I stepped back from the door, took out my phone, and opened the voice memo app. I hit record and set the phone on the narrow hall table near the doorframe, still within range. Then I walked into the main dining room, picked up a glass of water, and stood near Jordan. "How long are you in town?" I asked. He looked at me with faint surprise, as if he'd forgotten I could speak. Just tonight. I fly back tomorrow morning. You staying at the house? God, no. A hotel near the airport. Mom said the house is getting cleared out this week anyway. She already has a buyer lined up. I sipped my water. Fast. Yeah, well. No point letting it sit empty. I nodded. I did not ask him what he thought our father's house was worth. I did not ask him if he knew who held the title. I set my glass down, excused myself, and went back to the hallway. I retrieved my phone. 12 minutes of recording. I didn't listen to it then. I already knew what it would say. I have spent 16 years learning how to control my face when someone lies to me. I returned to the dining room, kissed my mother on the cheek, and told her I had an early shift. She squeezed my hand. Her skin was soft, her nails perfect. She smelled like lavender and something faintly chemical, like new car leather. I drove back to my apartment on Agricola Street and sat in my car for 20 minutes before going inside. It was snowing lightly, the kind of snow that doesn't accumulate, just blurs everything. I listened to the recording twice. On the second listen, I transcribed it, word for word, into a document on my laptop. Then I pulled up the land registry records for the house on Quinpool Road. My father bought the house in 1991, 2 years before I was born. The title was in his name alone. My mother left in 2004. No divorce, just a separation agreement I'd never seen. In 2005, when I was 12, the title transferred into a trust. The trustee was listed as E.V. Callahan. Evelyn Vera Callahan. Me. I was 19 when my father's lawyer, a man named Douglas Hennick, called me into his office and explained what a trust was. My father had suffered his first small stroke. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to frighten him. He wanted to make sure that if something happened, the house, his only real asset, wouldn't be vulnerable to claims from my mother or her creditors. He'd already heard from her twice, after years of silence, both times asking for money. Hennick explained that the house would remain in my father's name for tax purposes, but that I held it in trust. I could not sell it, could not leverage it, but I controlled it. If my father became incapacitated or died, I would have sole authority to distribute or retain the asset according to his written instructions, which were sealed in Hennick's office. I was 19. I nodded. I signed papers I didn't fully understand. I went back to university and forgot about it, because my father was still alive and still living in that house and it didn't feel real. Now it was real. I called Hennick's office the next morning. He'd retired, but his associate, a woman named Rashida Leong, had taken over the estate files. I identified myself and asked if she still had my father's file. I do, she said. I was actually planning to call you this week. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you. I need to know what my father's instructions were. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. He updated them in 2019, about 6 months after his stroke. The house was to be transferred fully into your name upon his death. No encumbrances. There's a clause specifying that your mother has no claim to it, and that any attempt to assert one would trigger a separate provision. What provision? A letter. To be delivered to her directly, from him, outlining the reasons for the exclusion. He was very specific. He wanted her to understand it wasn't an oversight. I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and drank coffee that had gone cold. Outside, the snow was still falling. My mother called me that evening. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful. Evelyn, sweetheart. I wanted to let you know I've scheduled the estate clearing for this Friday. I know it's fast, but the buyer is eager, and honestly, I think it's better to just get it done. Would you like to come by and take anything of your father's before the crew arrives? I let her finish. Then I said, who's the buyer? A lovely young couple. First-time homeowners. They're pre-approved, cash offer, no conditions. It's really ideal. And Jordan's fine with the timeline? Oh, yes. He and I discussed everything weeks ago. He's very supportive. I see. You're welcome to come by Thursday evening if you'd like. I'll be there sorting a few things. I'll let you know, I said. I didn't go Thursday. I went Friday morning, an hour before the estate clearing crew was scheduled to arrive. I used my key. My mother was already inside, standing in the living room surrounded by boxes, her coat still on. She looked up when I walked in, startled. Oh. Evelyn. I didn't think you were coming. I changed my mind. She smiled. It was thin. Well, feel free to look around. Most of the personal items are in the boxes by the stairs. I've labeled them. I walked past her into the kitchen. The house still smelled like my father, coffee, wood oil, the faint salt of sea air that clung to everything in Halifax. I opened the drawer by the sink where he used to keep important papers. It was empty. Looking for something? My mother asked from the doorway. Just looking. She watched me for a moment, then turned back to the living room. I heard her on the phone again, her voice low. I stood in the kitchen and thought about what detectives do when someone is about to get away with something. We don't chase. We don't confront. We document. We wait. We let them think they've won, and then we show them the gap between what they believed and what actually exists. I took out my phone and called Rashida Leong. I need you to send a formal notice to my mother, I said. Today. Informing her that the property at 862 Quinpool Road is held in trust under my authority, that any sale or transfer without my written consent is void, and that any proceeds collected under false pretense constitute fraud. I can do that. Do you want me to copy anyone else? Her lawyer, if she's listed one. And my half-brother, Jordan Millard, at his Toronto address. I'll send it to you. Understood. I hung up. I walked back into the living room. My mother was labeling a box with a black marker, her handwriting precise and slanted. She looked up. All set? Actually, I said, I need to talk to you about the house. Her expression didn't change. What about it? You told Jordan you were selling it. You told him he'd get half the proceeds. She set the marker down slowly. That's correct. It's what your father would have wanted. Did he tell you that? He didn't need to. I'm his wife. You separated in 2004. You didn't see him for over a decade. Her jaw tightened. I came back when he needed me. You came back when he had something you needed. She stared at me. The air in the room changed, the way it does when someone realizes a performance is no longer working. She straightened, smoothed her coat, and took a breath. Evelyn, I understand you're grieving. But this is not the time to be difficult. Your father and I had an understanding. What understanding? That I would manage the estate. That I would make sure things were handled properly. He didn't leave you the estate to manage. Her mouth twitched. Just slightly. He left it to both of us. You and Jordan. I'm simply executing it on your behalf. No, I said. He left it to me. In trust. 19 years ago. The color drained from her face. Not dramatically. Just a shade, like a photograph fading in sun. She sat down on the arm of the couch, her hand reaching for the cushion to steady herself. That's not possible. It's documented. Rashida Leong has the file. She's sending you a formal notice today. My mother looked at me the way people look at strangers on the witness stand who've just said something that doesn't fit the story they prepared. You're lying. I'm not. Your father wouldn't have done that. Not without telling me. He did tell you. You just didn't believe him. She stood again, quickly, her composure snapping back into place like a mask. This is absurd. I've already signed the sale agreement. The buyers have deposited earnest money. Jordan has already received his advance. Then you'll need to return it. I don't have it. That's not my problem. Her voice went cold. You would really do this? To your own mother? I looked at her. I have interviewed women who killed their children, men who killed their partners, people who stole from the dying. I have learned that cruelty does not always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like someone standing in your dead father's house, selling what was never theirs, and then asking you why you won't let them. You did this, I said. Not me. She picked up her purse from the couch, her hands shaking now, just barely. You'll regret this. Maybe. She walked past me toward the door, then stopped. She turned back. He was a difficult man, Evelyn. You didn't see that because you were his favorite. But I lived with him. I know what he was. He was difficult, I said. And he was right about you. She left. I heard her car start in the driveway, the engine idling for a long moment before she pulled away. I stood in the living room surrounded by half-packed boxes and thought about the difference between what we inherit and what we earn. My father gave me a house. But what I did with it, that was mine. The estate crew arrived 20 minutes later. I told them there had been a miscommunication, that the job was cancelled. They were polite, unbothered. They'd been paid a deposit they'd get to keep. I closed the door behind them and locked it. I spent the rest of the day going through my father's things. Not because I wanted to keep much of it, but because I needed to see it. His Navy photographs, the commendations framed on the wall, the model ships he built in the basement during the years after my mother left. There was a shoebox in his bedroom closet filled with letters I'd sent him from university, every single one, even the ones that were just a few sentences about exams or weather. He'd kept them all. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a file folder. Inside was a copy of the trust document, a letter from Hennick dated 2005, and a handwritten note on a piece of plain paper. Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and your mother has probably already tried to take this house. Don't let her. Not because I want you to punish her, but because I need you to understand that some people will take everything you give them and then come back for more. You deserved better than what she gave you. I hope I gave you enough to know the difference. Dad. I read it 3 times. Then I put it back in the folder and placed the folder in my bag. I have been a detective long enough to know that evidence is only useful if you're willing to use it. But wisdom is knowing when to hold it and when to let it speak for itself. Rashida Leong called me that evening. I sent the notice. Your mother's attorney responded within 2 hours. What did they say? That she was acting in good faith, that she believed she had authority as next of kin, and that she's willing to halt the sale pending resolution. Resolution meaning what? She wants a settlement. She's proposing that the house be sold and the proceeds split 3 ways, you, her, and Jordan. I was standing in my apartment, looking out at the harbor. The water was dark, the lights from the ships blinking in slow rhythm. No. I thought you'd say that. What do you want me to propose? Nothing. The house stays in my name. If she's collected money from Jordan or the buyers under false pretense, that's between her and them. I'm not negotiating. There was a pause. Evelyn, I have to tell you, she could make this complicated. She could claim undue influence, argue that your father wasn't of sound mind when he set up the trust, delay things in probate court for months. Let her try. It'll cost you. Legal fees, time, stress. I know. Another pause. Then Rashida said, okay. I'll file a motion to confirm the trust and close the estate. If she wants to fight it, she'll have to do it on the record. Thank you. I hung up and sat down at my kitchen table. I made a list, the way I do when a case gets complicated. Not a to-do list. A map. Who knew what, when they knew it, and what they stood to gain. My mother knew about the house. She knew my father had assets. She knew I existed, but she also knew I'd never asked about the estate, never challenged her, never made myself difficult. She assumed I didn't know. She assumed I wouldn't care. Jordan knew whatever she told him. He'd taken an advance, probably 20 or 30,000, based on her promise that the house was hers to sell. He wasn't malicious. He was just incurious. He'd never asked to see paperwork. He'd never called me. The buyers knew nothing. They'd made an offer in good faith, deposited money, and were probably now very confused. The only person who knew everything was me. And I'd known for 19 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and thought about my mother's face when I told her the house was mine. I have seen people lie for 16 years. I know what it looks like when someone is caught. But what I saw in her face wasn't surprise. It was anger. She genuinely believed she was entitled to it, not legally, but morally. She believed my father owed her. For the years of marriage, for coming back, for playing the role of grieving widow. The probate judge was a woman named Helena Squires, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain and a reputation for impatience with weak arguments. She read the file in silence for 3 minutes after we were called, then looked up. "Counselor," she said to my mother's attorney, "your petition argues that the decedent was not of sound mind in 2005 when this trust was executed. Do you have medical evidence of that?" "No, Your Honor. But we believe the circumstances." "Do you have any evidence that Miss Callahan exercised undue influence over her father at age 12? "Not direct evidence, but..." "Do you have any communication from the decedent indicating he wished to revoke or alter the trust at any point in the subsequent 19 years? A pause. "No, Your Honor." Judge Squires looked at Rashida. "Does the trust document contain a standard revocation clause?" "Yes, Your Honor." The decedent retained the right to revoke or amend at any time. He did amend it once, in 2019, to clarify distribution instructions. He did not alter the trustee designation. The judge looked back at my mother's attorney. "So your client is asking this court to void a legally executed trust, with no evidence of incapacity, no evidence of undue influence, and no evidence that the decedent wished to change it, on the grounds that she believes she should have been included?" "Your Honor, Mrs. Millard returned to care for her husband in his final years." "That's not a legal basis to void a trust." The courtroom was silent. My mother sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. I could see her breathing. Judge Squires closed the file. "Petition denied. The trust is valid. Ms. Callahan is the lawful trustee and, per the decedent's instructions, the sole beneficiary of the property. If Mrs. Millard has collected funds in anticipation of a sale she had no authority to execute, that's a separate matter outside this court's jurisdiction." She looked at my mother's attorney. "I'd advise your client to resolve that quickly." The gavel came down. We stood. My mother walked out without looking at me. Her attorney followed, already on his phone. Rashida touched my arm. "That's it. It's over." I nodded. But it didn't feel over. It felt like the beginning of something else. I didn't hear from my mother for 3 weeks. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early May, she called. "Evelyn." Her voice was different. Smaller. I almost didn't recognize it. "Hi. I wanted to let you know I've returned the deposit to the buyers. And I've made arrangements with Jordan to repay him. It'll take some time, but it's handled." "Okay." A pause. I could hear traffic in the background, the faint sound of a horn. She wasn't calling from home. I also wanted to say I'm sorry. I said nothing. I thought. I don't know what I thought. That it would be simple. That you wouldn't mind. That you didn't care about the house. "I didn't care about the house," I said. "I cared that you lied." "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm leaving Halifax," she said. "I'm going back to Montreal. I have a friend there, and I think it's better if I'm not here. Okay. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. She laughed. It was a short, sad sound. You're so much like him. I know. He was right about me. I think I always knew that. I didn't argue. There was no point. People confess when they're ready, not when you push them. Take care of yourself, I said. You too. She hung up. I set my phone down and looked around my apartment. It was small, tidy, full of books and plants and things I'd chosen. I thought about the house on Quinpool Road, still full of my father's furniture, still smelling like him. I hadn't decided yet what to do with it. Sell it, rent it, move into it myself. The choice was mine now. Fully. That weekend, I drove out to the house. It was a clear day, the kind of spring afternoon where the light is sharp and everything looks newer than it is. I walked through the room slowly, opening windows, letting air in. I stood in the kitchen where my father used to make coffee at 5 in the morning before his shifts, where he taught me how to tie knots using a length of old rope, where he told me once that the most important thing I could learn was how to tell the difference between people who loved me and people who loved what I could do for them. I sat down at the table and thought about inheritance. Not money or property, but the things we carry without choosing to. My father gave me this house, yes. But he also gave me the ability to see people clearly, to wait, to trust evidence over emotion. My mother gave me something too, though she didn't mean to. She taught me what it looks like when someone rearranges the truth to suit them, and she taught me that I didn't have to accept it. I have spent 16 years as a detective learning that most crimes are not spectacular. They are small, repeated, justified in the mind of the person committing them until they feel like fairness. My mother didn't think she was stealing. She thought she was correcting an imbalance. But the law doesn't care what you thought you deserved. It cares what you were given, and what you took. I locked up the house and drove back to the city. That evening, I called Rashida and told her I wanted to keep the house for now, that I'd handle the property taxes and maintenance, and that I'd let her know if that changed. Sounds good, she said. For what it's worth, your father would be proud of you. I hope so. I know so. I met with him a dozen times over the years. Every time, he talked about you. He said you were the only thing he got right. I thanked her and hung up. I stood at my window and watched the harbor lights come on, one by one, like a map of all the places people go when they think no one is watching. By summer, I'd started renting out the house on Quinpool Road. A young couple, both teachers, signed a year lease. They were careful with it, respectful. They sent me photos when they planted flowers in the front garden. It felt right, letting the house be lived in rather than sold. Jordan called me once, in June. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't understood the situation, that our mother had told him everything was settled. I believed him. He wasn't cruel, just distant. We agreed to stay in touch and both knew we wouldn't. Work continued. I worked a case involving financial fraud that summer, a man who'd stolen $200,000 from his elderly aunt by convincing her he was investing it on her behalf. He'd done it over 4 years, small withdrawals, little explanations, all of it documented in her checkbook that she couldn't read anymore without her glasses. We built the case slowly, carefully. When we arrested him, he cried and said he'd been planning to pay it back. They always say that. I thought about my mother sometimes. Not often, but in moments. When I saw women her age at the grocery store, when I passed the restaurant where we'd gathered after my father's funeral, when I signed documents related to the estate. I wondered if she thought about me. I wondered if she'd told her friend in Montreal what had happened, or if she'd rearranged that story too. In August, I received a letter from her. It was short, handwritten on plain stationery. Evelyn, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know I've started paying Jordan back, and I'm working again. I got a job at a bookstore. It's small, quiet. I think about your father often, and about the kind of mother I should have been. I know I can't fix it. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late for it to matter to you. I hope you're well. M. I read it twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what I would say. Some things don't have neat resolutions. Some relationships are neither repaired nor destroyed. They just become something smaller, quieter, a fact you live with rather than a wound you tend. That fall, I testified in the fraud case. The man was convicted and sentenced to 4 years. His aunt sat in the courtroom and wept, not because she wanted him in prison, but because she'd loved him and he'd used that. After the sentencing, she thanked me. She said, "I didn't think anyone would believe me." I told her, "People believe evidence. We just had to find it." She nodded. Then she said, "Do you think he's sorry?" I thought about it. I think he's sorry he got caught. I don't know if that's the same thing. She smiled, sad and small. No. It's not. I have learned, in 16 years of this work, that remorse and regret are not the same. Regret is wishing things had gone differently. Remorse is understanding why they shouldn't have gone the way they did. My mother regretted losing the house. I don't know if she ever felt remorse for trying to take it. In October, I was promoted to sergeant. It came with a small raise, a new desk, and more administrative work than I wanted. But it also came with the authority to lead investigations, to make calls without waiting for approval, to trust my own judgment in ways I couldn't before. I thought about my father, who spent 30 years following orders in the Navy and 20 more teaching young people how to navigate by stars and instinct. I thought about what he would say if he could see me now. I think he'd say I was doing fine. One evening in late November, I drove out to Quinpool Road to check on the house. The tenants were kind enough to let me walk through, and everything looked good. The floors were clean, the walls intact, the kitchen still smelled like coffee. I stood in the living room where I'd confronted my mother 8 months earlier and felt nothing sharp, nothing raw. Just a quiet sense of completion. I have spent my career learning how to close cases. You gather evidence, you build the narrative, you present it, and then it's done. But life doesn't close the same way. There's no verdict, no sentence, no moment when the judge says it's over. You just keep living, and eventually the sharp parts wear smooth, and the story becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. I stopped at a cafe on the way home and sat by the window with a cup of tea. It was snowing again, light and aimless. Across the street, a woman about my mother's age was locking up a bookstore. I watched her pull her coat tight, check the door twice, and walk away into the evening. I wondered if it was her, if she'd ended up here instead of Montreal, if she was still rearranging her story. But I didn't get up to check. Some questions don't need answering. I finished my tea and drove home. My apartment was warm, full of the small comforts I'd built over years, books I'd chosen, art I'd found, a life I'd made on my own terms. I thought about my father's note, the one that said I deserved better than what my mother gave me. I thought about the fact that he'd been right, and that I'd figured it out not because someone told me, but because I'd paid attention. That night, I pulled out the letter my mother had sent in August and read it one more time. Then I sat down and wrote a reply. It was short. Just a few lines. I got your letter. I'm glad you're working. I hope you're well. I don't think we'll be close, but I don't wish you harm. Take care. Evelyn. I mailed it the next day. I don't know if she replied. I didn't check. The winter passed quietly. Work was steady, domestic cases, thefts, a handful of assaults that required patience and careful interviews. I worked with a new partner, a young constable named Amir who asked good questions and took notes in careful, printed handwriting. He reminded me of myself at that age, eager and uncertain in equal measure. I tried to teach him what I'd learned, that people lie in patterns, that silence is often more useful than questions, that the truth usually lives in the details no one thinks to hide. In January, I got a call from Rashida Leong. She was closing out the last of my father's estate paperwork and needed a final signature. I met her at her office on a gray afternoon, the kind of day where the sky and the sea blend into one flat color. "That's it," she said, sliding the document across the desk. "Everything's transferred. The house is fully in your name now, no trust designation. You can do whatever you want with it." I signed. My handwriting looked small on the page, but steady. "Thank you," I said. "For everything." She smiled. "Your father was a good man. I'm glad this worked out the way he wanted." I thought about that on the drive home. What my father wanted. He'd wanted me to have something solid, something no one could take. He'd wanted me to understand that not everyone who claims to love you has earned the right. He'd wanted me to be strong enough to stand in an empty house and say no. He got what he wanted. That spring, Jordan called again. This time, the conversation was different. He said he'd ended things with our mother, that he'd realized she'd been borrowing money from him for years and never paying it back, that he was tired of being her safety net. He sounded older. Tired. "I should have listened to you," he said. "You didn't know." "I didn't want to know." "That's different." I didn't argue. He was right. We talked for a while longer. He told me about his job, about a woman he was seeing, about the possibility of moving to Vancouver. It felt like talking to someone I'd just met, polite and careful. But it was better than silence. Before we hung up, he said, "Do you think she'll ever change?" "I don't know," I said. "I think she'll keep trying to convince herself she already has." He laughed, short and bitter. "Yeah. That sounds right." After that, we texted occasionally. Not often, but enough to feel like we were both trying. In April, I took a week off and flew to Vancouver Island. I stayed in a small cabin near Tofino and spent my days walking on the beach, watching storms roll in from the Pacific. I brought a book but didn't read it. I just sat and listened to the water and thought about the difference between the life I'd imagined at 19 and the one I'd built at 38. I'd imagined I'd be married by now, maybe with children, maybe living somewhere warmer. I'd imagined my mother would come back into my life and we'd repair things, that she'd apologize and mean it, that we'd become close the way mothers and daughters in movies do. None of that happened. Instead, I became someone who knew how to stand alone. I became someone who understood that love without respect is just performance. I became someone who could sit in a courtroom and watch her mother's lies collapse under the weight of evidence and feel not triumph, but relief. I thought about my father, who gave me a house but also gave me the ability to keep it. I thought about the fact that inheritance isn't just about money. It's about what you learn to value, what you learn to protect, and what you learn to let go. On my last day in Tofino, I walked out to a rocky point and watched the sun set over the ocean. The sky went orange, then pink, then purple. The water turned silver. I thought about the fact that my father would never see this, that my mother would never ask if I had, that Jordan might never care. And I thought about the fact that it was enough. That I was enough. That the life I'd built, small and deliberate and mine, was exactly what I needed it to be. I flew home the next day. My apartment smelled like dust and stillness, the way places do when you've been gone. I opened the windows, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with the stack of mail that had accumulated. Bills, flyers, a postcard from a colleague on vacation. And a letter. Handwritten. Postmarked Montreal. I opened it slowly. "Evelyn, thank you for writing back. I didn't expect it, but it meant more than I can say. I wanted you to know I'm still in therapy, still working on myself. My therapist says I need to stop trying to fix the past and just acknowledge it. So here it is, I was a bad mother. I left when you needed me, and I came back when I needed you. I lied to you about the house because I thought I deserved it, and I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I finally understand what I did. I hope that's worth something. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it with the first one, in the drawer with my father's note and the trust documents and all the other pieces of evidence that made up the story of who I was. I didn't reply this time. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. She'd said what she needed to say. I'd heard it. That was enough. By summer, I'd settled into a rhythm. Work, home, the occasional dinner with colleagues, long weekends at the house on Quinpool Road when the tenants were away. I started running again, something I'd let slip over the years. Early mornings, along the waterfront, watching the city wake up in shades of gray and gold. I thought less about my mother. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because she'd stopped taking up so much space. She was just a person now, flawed and distant, someone I'd known once and didn't anymore. In August, the tenants gave notice. They were moving to Ontario for work, and they thanked me for being a good landlord. I told them I'd been lucky to have them. After they left, I spent a weekend at the house, walking through the empty rooms, deciding what came next. I could rent it again. I could sell it. I could move into it myself. I stood in the kitchen and thought about my father standing in the same spot, thought about my mother packing boxes she had no right to pack, thought about the 19-year-old version of myself signing documents I didn't fully understand because I trusted the man who asked me to. I thought about the fact that trust, real trust, is not about believing people will never hurt you. It's about believing they won't do it on purpose. My father hurt me by leaving. But he didn't do it on purpose. He gave me what he could, and he made sure I'd have something solid when he was gone. My mother hurt me on purpose. Not out of cruelty, but out of need. And that, I'd learned, was the difference that mattered. I decided to keep the house. Not to live in, not yet. But to keep. To hold. To have as a place I could return to if I ever needed to remember where I came from and what I'd learned. I locked the door and drove back to the city. That evening, I called Rashida and told her I'd be keeping the property long term, that I'd handle the taxes and upkeep, and that if she ever heard from my mother's lawyer again, to let me know. I don't think you will, she said. But I'll keep an eye out. Thank you. Evelyn? Yeah? You did good. With all of this. A lot of people wouldn't have. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said thank you again and hung up. That night, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine and watched the lights come out across the harbor. I thought about the fact that I was 38, single, childless, living alone in a city where winter lasted too long and summer never lasted long enough. I thought about the fact that I was also free. That I had a job I was good at, a home I'd chosen, and a life I'd built without asking permission. I thought about my father's voice, the last thing he said to me before the confusion took over, make sure she doesn't. I'd made sure. And in doing so, I'd learned something I hadn't expected, that protecting what's yours is not the same as being selfish. That saying no is not the same as being cruel. That you can love someone and still refuse to let them take from you. Love survives arguments. Respect survives silence. My father taught me that, not with words, but with the careful architecture of a trust document signed when I was 12, updated when I was 26, and revealed when I was 37. He knew my mother. He knew what she would do. And he made sure I'd have the tools to stop her. That's love. Not the kind that shows up in greeting cards, but the kind that shows up in legal documents and locked drawers and 19 years of quiet preparation. I finished my wine and went inside. I had an early shift the next day, a case to close, a life to live. The house on Quinpool Road would be there when I needed it. And until then, it would be exactly what my father intended, mine, fully and completely, held not in trust but in certainty. The years that followed were unremarkable in the best possible way. I worked. I ran. I took a pottery class and discovered I was terrible at it but enjoyed it anyway. I dated occasionally, a teacher, a paramedic, a woman who worked in archives at the library, but nothing stuck, and I found I didn't mind. I'd spent so much of my early life waiting for the life I thought I was supposed to have that I'd missed the one I was actually living. At 40, I was promoted again, this time to Detective Sergeant Major. It came with more responsibility and less fieldwork, which I resented at first and then grew to appreciate. I mentored younger detectives, taught interview techniques at the academy, and testified in court less often but with more weight when I did. I saw Jordan once more, in person. He came to Halifax for a conference and we met for dinner. He'd married the woman from Vancouver, a graphic designer named Priya who was warm and easy to talk to. They were expecting their first child. He seemed happy, or at least more settled than I'd ever seen him. "Have you heard from her?" he asked, and I knew he meant our mother. "Not in a few years." He nodded. "Me neither. I think she finally got the message. Or she found someone else to lean on." He smiled, sad and knowing. "Yeah. Probably that." We didn't talk about the house or the estate or the hearing. We talked about his work, my work, the baby on the way. When we said goodbye, he hugged me, and it felt genuine. Not close, but not distant either. Just what it was. "Take care of yourself, Evelyn. You too." I never saw him again, but we exchanged emails occasionally. Photos of his daughter, updates on promotions and moves. Small threads of connection, nothing heavy, nothing that required more than either of us could give. At 42, I finally moved into the house on Quinpool Road. My apartment lease was up, and I was tired of living in a building where I could hear my neighbors through the walls. The house felt big at first, too much space for one person. But I filled it slowly. A new couch, plants in the windows, bookshelves. I built myself with uneven results. I kept my father's desk in the corner of the living room. I didn't use it often, but I liked having it there, solid and scarred and real. One night, sitting at that desk, I found another envelope tucked into a drawer I'd never opened. Inside was a photograph of my father and me, taken when I was maybe 7 or 8. We were standing on a dock somewhere, his hand on my shoulder, both of us squinting into the sun. On the back, in his handwriting, "Evelyn, always braver than she thought." I cried then. Not from sadness, but from the weight of being known by someone who was gone. I framed the photo and hung it in the hallway, where I'd see it every day on my way out the door. At 45, I retired early from the police force. Not because I was tired of the work, but because I'd done it long enough to know I'd given what I could. I had a pension, savings, and the house. I had options. I started volunteering with a legal aid clinic, helping people navigate estate disputes and fraud cases. It turned out that everything I'd learned as a detective translated cleanly into helping people who couldn't afford lawyers. I was good at it. And it felt right, using what I knew to help people who'd been lied to, stolen from, or quietly erased from the narratives of their own families. One afternoon, a woman came in with a case that felt familiar. Her stepmother had sold her late father's car and pocketed the money, claiming he'd promised it to her. The woman had no proof, no documentation, just a memory of her father saying the car was hers. I helped her file a claim. We tracked down the sale records, cross-referenced the title history, and found a handwritten note in the glove compartment that the stepmother hadn't thought to check. The case settled quietly. The woman got the value of the car, plus interest. She cried when I told her. I thought no one would believe me, she said. I handed her a tissue. People believe evidence. We just had to find it. She smiled, and I thought about the woman from years ago, the aunt in the fraud case, who'd said almost the same thing. I thought about how many people go through life thinking no one will believe them, how many people let things go because they don't know how to fight, or don't think they deserve to win. I thought about the fact that my father had believed me, even when I was 12, even when I didn't understand what he was giving me. And I thought about the fact that the best thing I could do with that gift was to help other people find their own. At 47, I received one last letter from my mother. It came in late October, postmarked from a town in Quebec I'd never heard of. Evelyn, I'm writing to let you know I'm sick. Nothing dramatic, just old age catching up with me. I'm in a care facility now, and I'm comfortable. I don't expect you to visit, but I wanted you to know in case you ever wondered. I've thought about you often over the years, and about the things I did wrong. I hope you've built a good life. I hope you're happy. I think you deserved that more than I ever gave you credit for. M. I read the letter standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my father used to make coffee at dawn. I read it twice, then set it on the counter and went for a run. When I came back, I sat down and wrote a reply. Not a long one. Just enough. I got your letter. I hope you're comfortable. I hope you found some peace. I did build a good life. Thank you for saying so. Evelyn. I mailed it the next day. 2 weeks later, I received a short note from the care facility, informing me that my mother had passed away quietly in her sleep. There was no service planned. No estate. No unfinished business. I read the note, folded it, and put it in the drawer with the others. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. I just felt the quiet certainty that a chapter I'd been carrying for 36 years had finally, gently, closed. I'm 50 now. I still live in the house on Quinpool Road. I still volunteer at the legal aid clinic 3 days a week. I still run in the mornings, though slower now, and with more attention to my knees. I think about my father often. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. He gave me a house, yes. But more than that, he gave me the understanding that I was worth protecting. That I didn't have to accept what people offered just because they offered it. That I could say no, and the world wouldn't end. I think about my mother less often, but when I do, it's without bitterness. She was who she was. She did what she did. And I survived it, not by fighting harder, but by standing still and letting the truth do its work. I've learned, over 50 years, that the loudest people are rarely the ones who win. It's the ones who wait, who document, who let the evidence speak. I've learned that inheritance is not just money or property. It's the lessons you carry, the strength you didn't know you had, and the choice to be better than the people who hurt you. I've learned that you can love someone and still walk away. That you can forgive someone without letting them back in. That closure doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it just looks like a locked door and a clear boundary and a quiet knowledge that you did what you could. The house on Quinpool Road is mine now, fully and completely. I've thought about selling it a dozen times, but I never do. It's not just a house. It's the proof that my father saw me, believed me, and made sure I'd be okay. On weekends, I sit in the backyard with a cup of coffee and watch the birds. The garden is overgrown in places, neat in others. I've planted roses near the fence, the kind that bloom late and last through the first frost. Sometimes I think about the 19-year-old version of myself, sitting in a lawyer's office, signing documents she didn't fully understand. I think about the 37-year-old version, standing in this same house, telling her mother no. I think about all the versions in between, the ones who didn't know yet what they were capable of. I wish I could tell them, you're going to be fine. You're going to be better than fine. You're going to be exactly who you need to be. But they'll figure it out on their own, the way I did. By paying attention. By trusting evidence over emotion. By learning that the people who love you don't ask you to ignore what you know. I finish my coffee and go inside. The house is quiet, warm, mine. I have work to do this afternoon, a case file to review, a client to call back. But for now, I just stand in the kitchen and let myself feel it, the weight of a life well built, the piece of a story that ended the way it should have. My father used to say that the sea teaches you patience. That you can't rush the tide, can't argue with the wind. You just learn to navigate. I've spent 50 years learning to navigate. And I've learned this, that you don't need someone else's permission to protect what's yours. That you don't need applause to know you did the right thing. That the quietest victories are often the ones that matter most. I think about the house, the trust, the hearing, the letters. I think about all the small moments that added up to this one, standing in a kitchen I own, in a life I built, with nothing left to prove. And I think about the fact that my father knew, all those years ago, that I would get here. That I would be strong enough, smart enough, stubborn enough to hold on. He was right. I pull out my phone and look at the photograph I keep saved there, the one of my father and me on the dock, squinting into the sun, his hand on my shoulder. Always braver than she thought, he'd written. I smile. Close the phone. Get back to work. Because bravery isn't just about the big moments, the courtroom confrontations, the dramatic reveals. It's about the small ones too. The decision to stand your ground. The choice to trust yourself. The quiet knowledge that you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting what's yours. I learned that from a man who gave me a house when I was 12 and trusted me to know what to do with it. And I learned it from a woman who tried to take it and taught me, without meaning to, that some people will always choose themselves. Both lessons mattered. Both shaped me. But only one of them made me who I am. I'm Evelyn Callahan. I'm 50 years old. I'm a retired detective, a volunteer advocate, and the sole owner of a house on Quinpool Road that no one will ever take from me. And I'm finally, fully, exactly where I'm supposed to be.